So now we're going to move from a public sector perspective on local democracy to a civic sector perspective on local democracy. And to do that, I'm going to introduce Harris Steinberg, who is with PennPraxis. It's the clinical arm of University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is another interesting case story. It's a place with a great mayor, so you've got a lot of great things happening in the public sector. They're one of the cities in the United States that's created an Office of Innovation. They call it New Urban Mechanics, but a real official department, if you will, in the city government that's looking at how to innovate and how to redefine both the public sector and how the community works on public work. But more interesting than that, I think, is what's happening outside of city government in Philadelphia, where you have various entities from the civic sector that are leading public processes and leading public work and all kinds of innovation coming out of that. Harris Steinberg has been a leader on that. He's going to share a little bit about his work with some of the industrial waterfront and maybe a few other points on that this morning. And we're happy to have Harris Steinberg on this panel this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Harris Steinberg.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you for the opportunity to be up here with this distinguished panel. As Joel mentioned, I am Harris Steinberg. I am the director of PennPraxis, the applied research arm of the School of Design at Penn, founded in 2001 to further the mission of the School of Design within the community. So we extend design excellence beyond the classroom and out into the real world. We do that by facilitating faculty and student collaboration on real-world projects. As the director, I also get to work on projects, and mine are primarily focused on large-scale civic conversations about the built environment in Philadelphia. So I'm going to give you a quick case study of one project which is in many ways emblematic of the larger effort that Joel talked about in Philadelphia to change the conversation about how we plan our cities, who plans them, and what's the role of the citizen in shaping the future of Philadelphia. When I first came to, or back to Penn, I was an undergrad and graduate student there for most of my educational career. Came to Penn almost 12 years ago. Philadelphia was in a very different place. We did not have the kind of enlightened leadership like we see in Birmingham, nor that we have in Philadelphia currently. Development was done behind closed doors between powerful special interests and public officials, and the public had been largely kept out of any conversation about the built environment for decades. A city which in 1947, just after World War II, when Ed Bacon started to envision the future of Philadelphia, had seen a future for our waterfront, which in many ways set the stage for waterfront revitalization around the world. We had fallen into a waterfront that was largely privatized, inaccessible to the public, and being sold to the highest bidder. We even have a waterfront Walmart, which is not necessarily a distinguishing aspect of Philadelphia, but you can tell how far we had fallen in terms of waterfront revitalization. So when I came to Penn, we started to become involved with the editorial boards of our two daily papers, the Enquirer and the Daily News. And through that partnership, along with a colleague at the Penn Project for Civic Engagement, we began to engage citizens, the media, and academia in a partnership that would ultimately, we didn't know it at the time, change the way Philadelphia thought about planning its built environment. And that's the story I'm going to tell. In 2006, as you can remember back then, it was a frenzied day before the crash. Philadelphia, a city whose zoning code was 50 years old, whose comprehensive plan was 50 years old, who really had no interest in planning the city on a comprehensive level, was seeing a lot of development activity focused along the central Delaware. The millennials that were moving in, the empty nesters that were coming back, were really driving up not only property values, but interest in developing the waterfront. And we began to see gated communities along the riverfront. We had the possibility of casinos being sited along the riverfront because the Pennsylvania legislature had enabled casino legislation in Pennsylvania. Two would come to Philadelphia, and we were stripped of our land use prerogative. We had a waterfront that was cut off by 8 lanes of high-speed traffic, and we really were at a point where citizens were trying to figure out how do we make sense of our waterfront, gaining access to our waterfront, and ensuring that the public has a role in determining the future of the city. This gives you a little bit of a snapshot of some of the 23 projects that were planned for a very small section of a 6-mile run of our riverfront in 2006. Many of these were not necessarily projects that would move forward, but they were being entitled because of a strange kind of Philadelphia tradition called councilmatic prerogative, where anything that needs a zoning variance has to go through the councilman's office, making him essentially or her the gatekeeper to any development within a council district. And the civic associations then became the frontline warriors for any change along the riverfront. This graphic kind of gives you a sense of the kind of fractured nature of not only the civic but political and physical landscape along the central Delaware. The 6.5 miles kind of within one council district with multiple agencies at the federal, state, and local level, as well as civic associations and different authorities, all having control over their little piece of turf. And as we began to face the prospect of some fairly massive development without any comprehensive planning, there was a call for a process. In my office, a tiny little office at the University of Pennsylvania, in fact it was only me at the time, was in many ways seen as the last honest man standing in town. It's hard to believe, but we were asked, excuse me, to lead a public planning process to essentially model new behavior for the city. The city had really abrogated its responsibility. We did not have a permanent planning director. The last one had left for New York 18 months previously. Subsequent ones had all retired. And we were asked, along with the Penn Project for Civic Engagement, with significant funding from the William Penn Foundation, to create a process that would show Philadelphia how to plan the waterfront. The one catch is that the president of the William Penn Foundation would not sign the check until the mayor signed an executive order asking for the work. So we got the executive order signed, and we were off and running. We had 13 months to do work within the last year of the mayoral administration. We needed to be able to quickly gain the trust of citizens to ensure that we were actually doing work that was honest and genuine and authentic, and we weren't there as a shill for government, either to force casinos on the riverfront or to create some kind of smokescreen for political cover. So the team that I was able to assemble with the resources from the foundation quickly fanned out up and down the riverfront, meeting with all 15 civic associations that were included in the executive order of the mayor, and working to not only regain the trust, but to show Philadelphians that we could do things differently. We held river walks, we held all sorts of meetings, but the goal was that this was going to be open and transparent, the press would be involved, and we would put forward the recommendations for the operating agency or strategy to implement the vision of the citizens that created the waterfront, because the agency had been in charge of waterfront development, had lost the faith of the public. We created a news site, again with resources from William Penn. This site runs to this day. It's called Plan Philly. It's an alternative media web journalism site run by professional journalists, and it has become the paper of record in our diminished age of media for planning and development in Philadelphia. We hosted an extremely boisterous, fractious, and large engagement process. More than 4,000 Philadelphians participated in over 200 meetings over this 13-month period. Many different interests would insert their voice into the room at different times. We had longshoremen, we had casino activists, we had anti-casino activists, we had all sorts of folks trying to usurp the process for their benefit. But the goal that for us was to really to keep people on task, to say this isn't about land use, this isn't necessarily about specific land use, it's not about specific employment opportunities, it's really about the role of the citizen in determining the shape of the city. We brought folks from national and international experts to Philadelphia to talk about waterfront development from near and far, how you manage waterfront development, what's the role of ecology, what's the role of economics, what's the role of transportation, all of which was meant to engage and inform a population and of citizenry so that they could ultimately create a set of principles that would be used by designers to then reflect the will of the public. This was a values-based process that ensured that the civic voice was at the basis of anything that designers would reflect. We hosted a design charrette with national and international design leaders that their charge was to take those principles that were created from the civic dialogue and reflect back how those could be shaped in terms of physical form. We continued to work back and forth with members of the public as well as members of the development community, meeting many bumps along the road. The picture on the far right is actually a former executive director of the Philadelphia Planning Commission who tried to undermine the process that we were using because he felt that his business, which was based on knowing the system and how to manipulate it, was going to be kind of taken away, but we persevered, largely because of the role of the press. We not only had the significant input of 4,000 citizens in the process, but we had intense media scrutiny throughout the process, both mainstream media in the form of the newspapers, but we had radio and TV coverage as well as the blogosphere, all of which kept this kind of out in the open and enabled a small independent group at the University of Pennsylvania to take on some pretty powerful special interests. Over 1,500 people came to the final presentation of the vision at the Pennsylvania Convention Center. A remarkable thing. This is planning. This is not a concert. And images like this, which were prepared by our partner WRT, who was our lead planning partner on the effort, really start to give Philadelphians a sense of what the waterfront could be. We went on beyond then the administration of John Street and into the current administration of Mayor Nutter with continuing support from the William Penn Foundation, helped to structure and found an advocacy group that is comprised of not only the civic associations that were part of the executive order, but a couple of nonprofits, whose job is now to keep the city's feet to the fire in terms of ensuring that the vision that was created by the citizens is being implemented by the city. You see on the slide on the right is actually our current Mayor Nutter accepting that vision from the citizens of Philadelphia at an event at the Seaport Museum. And the number one recommendation at this point in the process was to reform the Penn's Landing Corporation, the disgraced waterfront agency which had failed to represent the civic voice in terms of public implementation of the waterfront. The corporation has been reformed. We have a new master plan. We have some new parks by James Corner Field Operations, all of which is to say that we were able to kind of insert a number of different players into the process and create a multi-pronged process that involved not only the citizens, but media, philanthropy, professional partners. You can see the list here, to create ultimately a vision for a city that at the time was yearning for some kind of new direction. I think the most important thing, as I can distill this all down to the work that we did, is that this partnership of media, philanthropy, academia, and then the citizenry created what I like to call a civic force field that actually drew a wedge between, in our case, special interests or business interests and politics, which had been really in bed together for several decades. And this enabled then a new type of civic engagement to really become business as usual in Philadelphia, to the point now where under the Nutter administration, we are now working with the government. We are often consultants to the Parks and Recreation Department. These are two projects, one of which, Green 2015 on the right, was to help the deputy mayor for Parks and Recreation create a blueprint to add 500 acres of new park space to Philadelphia by 2015 to meet one of the mayor's sustainability goals. And the image on the left is a 2,000-acre waterfront park which we are currently working on, which is a legacy watershed park created in the 19th century, still supplies Philadelphia with water supply. Both of these projects involved intense civic collaboration and engagement in terms of determining how these will become kind of relevant not only to the citizenry, but serve the city of Philadelphia into the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues.